I still remember the first day I met my wife. It felt like one of those moments that people talk about in movies. The kind of moment when the world suddenly slows down for a second, and you realize something important has just happened. She walked into the room, and I noticed her immediately. She was beautiful. Not just in the usual way people describe beauty. There was something about her presence, the way she smiled, the way she spoke, the calm confidence in her eyes. She was slim, elegant, and incredibly attractive. But what really caught my attention was her personality. She was kind, warm, and somehow she made everyone around her feel comfortable. We started talking that evening, and the conversation lasted for hours. It didn't feel forced. It didn't feel awkward. Everything flowed naturally. I remember thinking that I had never met someone like her before. Over the next few months, we grew closer. We went on long walks in the evenings, talked about our dreams, our plans for the future, the kind of life we wanted to build. And slowly, without even realizing it, she became the most important person in my life. When I asked her to marry me, I was nervous. Even though I knew how much we loved each other, there is always that small moment of fear before you hear the answer. But when she smiled and said yes, it felt like the happiest moment of my life. Our wedding was simple, but it was perfect. Friends, family, laughter, music, and the feeling that we were starting something new together. The first 2 years of our marriage were wonderful. We supported each other through work, through challenges, through everyday life. We cooked dinner together, watched movies late at night, and talked about the future we were building. And one day, everything changed in the most beautiful way possible. She told me she was pregnant. I still remember the moment she showed me the test. My heart started beating faster. At first, I didn't even know what to say. Then I hugged her. And suddenly, the future we had imagined together became even bigger. 9 months later, our child was born. It was the most emotional moment of my life. Holding that tiny human in my arms felt almost unreal. But as the months passed, life began to change. Not just for me, for her. Pregnancy had changed her body. She gained weight. And unlike what many people expect, the weight didn't disappear quickly after the baby was born. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into a year. And she struggled to lose the extra weight. She tried different diets. She tried exercising when she had the time. But taking care of a baby is exhausting. Sleepless nights, constant responsibility, very little time for yourself. Slowly, I began to notice something. She wasn't the same confident woman I had married. She started looking at herself differently. Sometimes I would catch her standing in front of the mirror, quietly examining her reflection. Not smiling, not happy, just thinking. And although I didn't say it out loud, something inside me had also begun to change. The woman I had married had been slim, confident, and strikingly beautiful. Now she looked tired, stressed, and heavier than before. At first, I told myself that it didn't matter, that this was normal, that many women go through this after pregnancy. But slowly, uncomfortable thoughts began to appear in my mind. Thoughts I wasn't proud of. Thoughts that would soon begin to change our marriage in ways I never expected. And I didn't yet realize how much those thoughts would eventually cost me. At first, the changes between us were small. So small that I convinced myself they didn't matter. But little by little, the warmth between Emily and me began to fade. I started noticing things that I had never paid attention to before. The way her clothes fit differently. the way she avoided certain mirrors in the house, the way she sometimes hesitated before going out with me. Emily had gained weight after the pregnancy, and, in my mind, that became the problem. I told myself that I was just being honest, that I was helping her. But the truth is, my words were much harsher than I realized. One evening, we were sitting at the dinner table. Emily had cooked dinner after spending the entire day taking care of our baby. She looked tired, but she still tried to smile. I looked at her and suddenly said, "Emily, you really need to do something about your weight." She stopped eating. Her fork froze in her hand. For a moment, she didn't even look at me. Then she quietly asked, "What do you mean?" I leaned back in my chair and shrugged. "I mean exactly what I said. You've gained a lot of weight. It's not healthy." Emily looked down at her plate. "Daniel, I had a baby," she said softly. "My body is still recovering." But instead of understanding, I doubled down. "That's not an excuse," I replied. "There are women who give birth and still stay in shape." The words came out colder than I intended, but instead of stopping, I kept going. "You're eating too much. You don't move enough. You could at least try." Emily's eyes filled with something I hadn't seen before. Not anger, not even sadness, just hurt. But I refused to see it. In my mind, I was being reasonable. I told myself that someone had to say the truth, that maybe she needed to hear it. A few days later, the topic came up again. This time it was even worse. Emily was getting ready to go out with me to meet friends. She tried on 2 different dresses. Both of them looked fine, but when she asked me what I thought, I sighed. "You used to look amazing in these," I said. She froze again. "What do you mean, used to?" I shrugged. "Emily, you know what I mean. You've changed. You can't just ignore it." I could see her confidence collapsing in front of me. But instead of stopping, I kept justifying myself. In my head, I kept repeating the same thought. I'm doing this for her. If she feels uncomfortable enough, she'll push herself to change. If I stay honest, she'll lose the weight faster. At least that's what I believed. But the truth was much uglier. Every time I compared her to someone else, I was slowly breaking her confidence. And, unfortunately, I started doing that more and more often. One night I said something that crossed a line. We were watching television and a fitness commercial appeared on the screen. A woman with a perfect athletic body was advertising a workout program. I looked at the screen and then said casually, "See, that's what discipline looks like." Emily didn't say anything. She just lowered her eyes, but I didn't stop. "Look at women at my office," I added. "Some of them had babies too, and they still look great." The room suddenly felt very quiet. Emily stood up slowly and went to the kitchen. I heard the sink running, and I realized she was pretending to wash dishes so I wouldn't see the tears in her eyes. But even then, I convinced myself that I was doing the right thing, that sometimes people need tough honesty, that if I didn't push her, she would never change. And while Emily was slowly losing confidence in herself, I was slowly becoming someone I barely recognized. Because at work, my attention had already begun to shift. There was someone else. Her name was Olivia. She was confident, energetic, always smiling, slim, stylish. Everything Emily used to be, before the baby. At first, we only talked during lunch breaks, then during coffee breaks. Then we started messaging each other. Just friendly conversations. Nothing serious. At least that's what I kept telling myself. Olivia didn't know I was married, and I never corrected her when she assumed I was single. In my mind, it wasn't cheating. It was just harmless attention. But looking back now, I realize something painful. While I was enjoying the admiration of another woman, the woman who had sacrificed the most for our family was quietly falling apart. And I didn't even notice how deeply I was hurting her. Looking back now, I can clearly see the moment when Emily began to change. But at that time, I refused to notice it. She became quieter. Not in an angry way, not in a dramatic way, just quieter. Emily had always been a cheerful person. She used to laugh easily, joke about small things, and bring warmth into our home. But slowly, that light inside her began to fade. She started doubting herself. Sometimes I would see her sitting on the couch in the evening while the baby was asleep, scrolling through photos on her phone. Photos from the past. Photos from before the pregnancy. Photos where she was slimmer, confident, smiling without hesitation. Sometimes she would stand in front of the mirror, looking at herself, touching the sides of her waist, and then quietly walking away. I could see it in her eyes. She felt unattractive. She felt like she had lost the woman she used to be. But instead of supporting her, I did something much worse. I ignored it. Somewhere in my mind, I convinced myself that my cold behavior would somehow motivate her. I thought that if she felt uncomfortable enough, she would push herself harder, that she would diet more, exercise more, change faster. In my mind, I believed I was helping, but in reality, I was slowly breaking the confidence of the woman who had once trusted me the most. And while Emily was fighting her insecurities at home, I was slowly drifting into a completely different world. It started with messages. At night, after Emily went to sleep, I would sit on the couch with my phone, and I would text Olivia. At first it was innocent, just jokes about work, funny stories about our colleagues, complaints about stressful days. But the conversations slowly became longer, more personal, and more frequent. Sometimes we would text for hours, late into the night. Emily never asked who I was texting. She trusted me, and I took advantage of that trust without even realizing how serious it was. Then one day, something happened that pushed things even further. Olivia and I had a business meeting scheduled with a client. It was supposed to be simple, just work. We met in a small cafe near the office to discuss the project before the meeting. At first, everything was completely professional. We talked about the presentation, the numbers, the plan. But after the meeting ended, neither of us left immediately. Instead, we ordered coffee, and the conversation slowly shifted. We started talking about life, about childhood memories, about dreams, about relationships. Olivia laughed easily. She listened carefully when I spoke, and for the first time in a long while, I felt admired, seen, important. I told myself it was harmless, just two colleagues talking. Just a friendly connection, nothing more. But deep down, I knew it wasn't completely innocent anymore, because while I was sitting there with Olivia, laughing and enjoying the moment, there was someone else at home. Someone who once looked at me with the same warmth. Someone who had given birth to our child. Someone who was quietly fighting her insecurities alone. Emily. And the worst part is, I didn't yet realize how deeply my actions were hurting her, or how close I was to losing something far more valuable than I understood. A few days later, Olivia and I met again. It wasn't supposed to be anything special, just another meeting after work. We sat in a quiet cafe not far from the office. The evening was calm, and the place was almost empty. At first, we talked about work again, but after a while the conversation slowly became more personal, just like the last time. I don't know why, but at some point I started talking about Emily. And the way I talked about her now makes me feel ashamed. I looked at Olivia and said something that I thought was just honest, but in reality it was cruel. I said, "You know, you have a really beautiful figure." She smiled politely, and then I added something even worse. Not like my wife, she completely let herself go after the baby. The moment those words left my mouth, Olivia's smile disappeared. She looked at me with surprise. "Your wife?" she asked. There was a long pause. It suddenly became clear that she had never known about Emily. I nodded. "Yes, I'm married, and we have a child." Olivia leaned back slightly in her chair, clearly shocked by what she had just heard. For a few seconds, she didn't say anything. Then she looked at me seriously and said something that I will probably remember for the rest of my life. "Daniel, you shouldn't talk about your wife like that." Her voice wasn't angry, but it was firm. "She carried your child for 9 months," she continued. "She gave birth to your baby. That changes a woman's body, and it deserves respect." I didn't know what to say. Olivia looked at me carefully and added, "What she probably needs right now isn't criticism. She needs your support. She needs your love. If you support her, encourage her, and stand beside her, it will help her much more than judging her." Then she said something that made my chest feel heavy. "If my husband spoke about me the way you just spoke about your wife, I would be heartbroken." I looked down at the table. For the first time in a long while, I truly saw my own behavior from the outside. Olivia continued quietly, "You shouldn't treat her with indifference. She's your partner. She's the mother of your child." Then she took a deep breath and said the final words that ended everything between us. "I don't think we should keep meeting like this. And we definitely shouldn't keep texting. This isn't right." She stood up, gave me a small respectful nod, and left the cafe. I stayed there alone for a long time, thinking, replaying every moment of the last months in my head. And suddenly, everything became painfully clear. While Emily had been struggling with insecurity, exhaustion, and the huge responsibility of motherhood, I had been focusing only on her appearance. Instead of helping her, I had made her feel worse. Instead of supporting her, I had made her feel alone. That realization hit me harder than anything Olivia had said. When I came home that evening, Emily was sitting on the couch with our baby sleeping beside her. She looked tired, but when she saw me, she smiled softly, and that simple smile made the guilt inside me even stronger. I sat down next to her and took her hand. "Emily," I said quietly, "I need to tell you something." I apologized. For everything. For my words. For my behavior. For not supporting her when she needed it the most. At first she was silent. Then she looked at me with surprise, and maybe a little hope. And that night I made a promise. Not just to her, but to myself. I told her I would support her. Not by judging, but by standing beside her. A few days later, we did something that might sound simple, but for us, it meant a lot. We joined a gym together. The funny part is, I had never liked gyms before, but this time it wasn't about me. It was about being there for her. We started going together, slowly, without pressure, without criticism, just encouragement. And something incredible began to happen. Emily started smiling again. Her confidence slowly returned. Not because she was trying to impress me, but because she felt supported. Months passed, and she didn't just lose weight. She became something even more important, a stronger version of herself, a happier version of herself. The version that had always been there, but needed love and support to come back. And I learned something that I should have understood from the very beginning. Real love isn't about perfection. It's about standing beside someone when they feel imperfect, and helping them remember who they truly are.